Great. So Martha, I'll let you kind of take it away. Go ahead.
Great. Hello, everybody, and thanks for having me today. I recognize some of the names and faces, and I'm sure most of you probably know my husband, John, who photobombed me a minute ago, who was really my reason for getting into all of this. John was diagnosed with Parkinson's back in 2002 when he was just 44. So he's going on, let's see, 18 years. And, you know, for those of you who have seen him, we've had some ups and downs over the years, but he's doing remarkably well. And a lot of that has to do with a keen focus on nutrition and exercise. He talks a lot about exercise and, you know, the biking program that he does, and what that was part of why we were so excited about, you know, what Meredith and Parkinson's Pointe are doing also, because, you know, I think often when you get a diagnosis of Parkinson's, it's kind of like, oh yeah, Parkinson's, here's a pill, you know, it's all downhill from here. And, you know, I'm here to tell you that that has not been our experience, because we have really worked together to understand the importance of nutrition and things in our food supply that can be impacting your health, and how to address that. And then a little bit later, I'll also talk to you about a probiotic product that I'm usually not in sales mode, but I did make it specifically for John, and I can tell you about the research behind how I made that and why we think that's part of what is helping him. But
excuse me for just a second. I'm Pat St. Germain, and I just unmuted myself. But before I leave, I would like to know where there is a resource to buy a bicycle like John is using, because I'm locked out of, everybody's locked out of their exercise facilities. And I have a recumbent bike, but I would like to have a bike that I could train on. So I would like to look into getting one that would be adequate to train on at home. I could put it in my apartment since we're all locked out of everything.
Right. I can tell you, we bought our cycles a long time ago. But what I can do is commit to John and I taking a look at that and following up with Meredith.
That'd be good.
And then Meredith can provide some resources. And
sounds perfect. I'll quit talking.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll that after through an email.
Sure. So, you know, to start with, you know, I mean, I grew up cooking. My mother was a cook, and so I had some pretty good cooking skills. But, you know, over the time in our early marriage, because we were busy and had little kids and just kind of the rush of life, I had really probably stopped being the good cook that my mother trained me to be, and really thinking about nutrition. And we ate a lot of pasta and easy foods and things like that. But when John was first diagnosed, you know, I looked at how the doctor had approached it with him, and how science and medicine in general was just kind of looking at this point solution. Here's a pill, you know, there's nothing you can do. And my background is actually in accounting and business systems. And I was, you know, what is termed a business turnaround expert. And really, to be able to do that kind of work, you have to look at the whole system of a business, or, you know, anything you're trying to make operate better. And so I thought, well, why can't I apply my business turnaround expertise to understanding the whole system of Parkinson's and look at this from a systems perspective. So of course, in my background, when I look at a business, the way you do that systems analysis is you're looking at everything that flows through the business, and that's, you know, sales and expenses and inventory purchases and all these kinds of things, and you follow them through the system, looking for, you know, who's touching it and where could it be, the process be broken. And that's where you create your risk. And I thought, well, okay, let's apply that thinking to Parkinson's disease. And, you know, what are the major flows through the system? And of course, really with any disease, with the human body, the major flows through the system are food and water. I mean, we're like 80% water. And so I started to look at food very early on. And in that process, within the first year of John's diagnosis, probably within 2 months, I had thrown out everything in the pantry and started over. And back then I was trying to go all organic, but of course in 2002, there weren't a lot of organic options. So that's what really led me to studying what's in the food supply that we have and how could that be impacting us. And one of the early things that I found was actually a foundation called the Westin Price Foundation. Westin Price was a dentist, actually, and I think in about the 1950s, 40s and 50s, he started observing what was going on in the facial and bone structure of you know, people's mouths and teeth, and he traveled the world looking at the differences in dental decay and facial structure and disease compared to indigenous populations around the world, and essentially was able to tie these things to the change to the Western diet, which is highly processed, a lot of carbohydrates and sugars. And I mean, he's no longer with us, but there's a woman who runs his foundation by the name of Sally Fallon. And, you know, one of the things I share when I go to these talks is her cookbook, which is called Nourishing Traditions. And it covers nutrition and the traditional foods around the globe that, you know, for centuries have provided health and nutrition. A lot of it is, you know, fermented foods, live foods, eating some things that, like, maybe some of us might remember from our grandparents or something, like organ meats and things that people don't eat now because you can go to the grocery store and just like get parts and only the parts that you like. But, you know, a lot of these traditional foods that we no longer eat much of actually have much more bioavailability of the nutrition. And, you know, one of the things I discovered along the way is, you know, the potential in the human gut over time of, you know, the impacts of all these chemicals and things that we may not be absorbing nutrition as well. So, you know, I highly recommend taking a look at the Westin Price Foundation website and the educational materials they have. And if you're up for some cooking, you know, taking a look at Nourishing Traditions. But in that early work and research, I also started looking at the chemicals that are used in our food supply and their connection to Parkinson's disease specifically. I met a researcher from UCLA who had been studying the epidemiology of Parkinson's for 20 years. And she was actually instrumental in defining a section of California that is called Parkinson's Alley. And this particular area of California is where more than 50% of the produce that we eat in America is grown. And they have a much higher incidence of Parkinson's disease and a much higher incidence of Parkinson's disease in young people. And she was also able to show, she was one of the people involved in showing that the herbicide paraquat, which is used in agriculture in America still today, is a key chemical that can cause the dysfunctions that are identified in Parkinson's disease. So, and what's kind of amazing about that is paraquat is actually illegal. You cannot use it in China, and some countries in South America have outlawed it, but we still allow it here in the United States. Another chemical that's widely used in all of our food supply and has been increasing over the last 30 years is glyphosate. I'm sure most of you have seen in the news over the last couple of years the Roundup lawsuit from the gentleman who won a $260 million lawsuit against Monsanto for his cancer. But there are also connections to how that particular chemical acts in plants. It breaks a particular pathway that is also connected to that pathway in bacteria, and it's the biochemical pathway where dopamine is made. So, you know, this is another area where I talk to people about understanding the food that you're buying and whether or not it has been grown or harvested using the chemical glyphosate. And so I focus very much on products that say they are non-GMO or organic because they should not have had exposure to glyphosate. But one of the things that I have found in talking to organic food companies, there's actually an organic grain company, I can't, the name is escaping me at the moment, but they've done a lot of research into the grains that they supply, and even the organic grains now are starting to be contaminated with glyphosate because so much of it is used on croplands in the United States. It runs off into the rivers and streams, and then of course the downstream organic farmer is irrigating from that same stream, and they're getting exposure in their crops as well. There are about 90 crops that use glyphosate as a drying agent, and that includes things like lentils, wheat uses it as a drying agent. So at the end of the harvest, to make it dry faster, they will spray it. And so they can get around chickpeas. There's actually a report that I can dig up and share with Meredith if you guys want to get it, that shows, you know, different foods and what they tested at the level of glyphosate. A couple that were particularly interesting to me were Cheerios, because I had given my kids Cheerios all the time as babies. And so I know Meredith's pregnant. So if you're gonna serve Cheerios to your baby when they start doing the little finger picking up, you wanna make sure that those are organic Cheerios, because oats are actually one of the most highly laden with glyphosate. So I'm gonna move a little bit from the grim reaper of food, and then I'll come back to that. But so along the way of you know, looking at food and studying food, you know, this went on for a decade really, and John likes to joke and say that I've had him on No Fun Diet 1 through 9 as I discover new things and say, you know, don't eat don't eat this, don't eat that. One of the things I did discover also just in talking with people with Parkinson's is many people with Parkinson's, not all, but many, have a sweet tooth or developed a sweet tooth after they got Parkinson's. So I'll come back to that in a moment, but I'm going to talk to you about your microbiome. So if you haven't heard the term microbiome, whoop, where did my screen go? Oh, somebody's trying to call me. Sorry, my attorney is trying to file a patent this morning. So the microbiome is the trillions of bacteria, fungi, and viruses that live in and on our body. And they function as our internal pharmacy to maintain our health. I actually have a TEDx talk where I talk a bit more in depth about that, and I can share the link to that with Meredith. But in 2014, I read a book called Missing Microbes by a doctor, an infectious disease doctor from NYU, who was talking about the connection to chronic disease and the connection to the use of antibiotics in both food and medicine from the 1950s forward. And, you know, of course, you know, we're a little bit older, so we didn't get antibiotics like candy like our children did, but, you know, people pretty much in the last 2 decades are taking a tremendous amount of antibiotics. But what a lot of people didn't realize is that the chicken, cows, and pigs and things that we're eating are given antibiotics on a daily basis, prophylactically. And I use that prophylactically in parentheses or in quotes because they also discovered in the late 1950s that antibiotics could make animals get fat faster. And so they've used them as growth promoters so they could get their animals to market much faster. And of course, then the animal consumes the antibiotics, you consume the antibiotics from the animal. And so we continue to get exposed to that. And so that was kind of an eye-opener for me, because I had also noticed a connection just in talking with Parkinson's people to different exposures to antibiotics, either early in life with multiple strep infections or a number of people who had taken antibiotics long-term for either an autoimmune disease or acne, because it's antibiotics are a fairly common treatment for acne for teenagers. And so I started looking at that, and I had never heard the term microbiome. So I kind of started digging into it. And about 6 months later, the first paper was published from a researcher out of Finland named Philip Shepherd-Hans, who showed that the 2 different types of Parkinson's, so you have people who have tremor dominant, and you have people who have posture and gait problems, and you know they classify the type of Parkinson's by your dominant symptoms. And he was actually able to show from the gut bacteria of these people with Parkinson's which category they fell into. And I was like, eureka, that's it, because I had been looking for a way of how do you tie this whole system together of what's flowing through the body. And of course, the microbiome, your gut bacteria, really holds the evidence of the kinds of food you eat, the kinds of chemicals you're exposed to, even stress is evident in your microbiome and the organisms that are there and what they're having to deal with. And so at that point, I quit my job, and John and I started funding some research at the University of Chicago looking at our own microbiome samples. And by that, I mean, you look at people's poop. Some of you are participating in my company's research project by providing a sample. And we were able to, identify differences between John's and my sample. We were able to connect things in John's sample to problems in the food supply that I had been looking for, specific, and also antibiotic resistance. And from that, I ended up founding a company called the BioCollective that focuses not just on Parkinson's, but on all diseases and this connection to the microbiome, because what we can see in the destruction of the gut bacteria in our own ecosystem is that it's having many health effects across the population. And 5 years ago, when I started the company, like most people are like, what's a microbiome? And now what I find is it's pretty common for people to have heard of the term. It's used a lot in, the everyday press. You read stories about it. Most people have even heard of the term fecal transplant, where they take a healthy sample from someone who's not sick, and they make it into a preparation and treat somebody with C. diff, or now they've shown they can cure Crohn's with a fecal transplant. There's actually a physician in Australia who has done some research over the last 5 to 7 years in using fecal transplants in Parkinson's disease, and he has had some mixed success. I mean, he's had some people where it's, he said he's reversed probably 90% of their symptoms, and others that have not had as strong an effect. But, I think as I look at the whole system, I think it also can go back to, what are those chemical exposures? What are those continued stressors? What are things that you're continuing to have issues with that might, continue to have an impact on your microbiome. And stress is definitely one of those. And one of the observations that I made maybe 6 or 7 years ago is I'm kind of an intense person. I'll say, like, I'm a type A person. And I think I came to the realization that I personally created a great deal of stress for my husband from the intensity of my personality and my expectations for everybody in our household. And I actually changed my behavior. Would you agree with that, John?
Yes, dear.
Yes, dear. He says, to try to create less stress myself. And I actually noticed, I don't know how many of you have your spouse in the room with you, but I noticed just in meeting different people and their spouses that a lot of Parkinson's people were married to type A people. And that might also be a frank conversation you want to have with your spouse about if they produce stress for you, how they might try to think about ways that they could produce less stress. But all of these things are actually amazingly evident when we look at the bacteria in someone's gut, and we see basically how it's metabolizing things. So you can see stress hormones that are produced by bacteria in the gut, and you get this loop with the brain. There's some researchers in Ireland that we've collaborated with that are really leading the area of the gut-brain axis and how it affects depression, which is also quite common symptom along with Parkinson's disease. And you can also see the evidence of the chemical exposures and some of those things. So now I'm going to go back to food and nutrition. Well, maybe I should say, does anybody have any questions before I keep yakking on? I see there's a question. you want to?
You were talking about the pesticides, paraquat and stuff like that. Recently emailed the EPA. Andrew Wheeler is the administrator of it, and paraquat is coming up for review in the, and I don't want to get super technical on this, but it's called the FIFRA. Meredith, I'll send this to you. If you can see this, I'll send you the information. They are going to be meeting in about 60 days to review a lot of the pesticides. And I've always been a politically active person in a number of issues. And I see this as one of the things that we Parkinsonian people can do, is to, get on our government and say, thanks for allowing all those fun chemicals to enter my body. And I'll be happy to send you a postcard about how fun Parkinson's is. But if the people with Parkinson's would get more active and talking to the government, I think it would go a long way, because there's going to be a horde of us soon.
Well, and one of the things I did find out in my research of digging, it took me about 2 years to get the data, but it was quite surprising for me to see that the number of people with Parkinson's under the age of 40 has doubled in the last decade, while we were finding a cure at, places that will remain unnamed. But, very little focus on causal factors. So much money goes into Parkinson's research, but the vast majority of that research is looking at drugs to slow the process, or repurposing of existing drugs to extend patents. I talk
Is it
a
Linda?
lot. In the last 6 months, I've been talking to people about the fact that the reason why Parkinson's hasn't been cured is because Parkinson's is a market. And as long as Parkinson's is a market instead of a problem to be solved, people will treat it as a market. And what do we do in our society? When we have a market, we try to grow the market. We don't try to destroy the market and break it down. And, I say, like, my objective is to destroy the Parkinson's market and get rid of it. And to do that, you really have to look at the underlying causal factors. So that's a really good suggestion to try to make some noise, write your congressman, write the EPA, write your senators, and really get involved in these toxic chemicals and what they've done to you, but also, what they're going to do to your friends and family. Because, we are all in this together. And I would suggest, if you haven't seen the movie Dark Waters, again, it's about cancer, but the same thing holds true for Parkinson's. And you see what these big corporations have done to essentially hide or obfuscate the connections between the chemicals that they're putting in our food supply. Like, I don't know why you'd want to put a neurotoxin, known neurotoxins, in the food supply, which is what a lot of the herbicides and pesticides are. And then glyphosate actually, or, the chemical component of that, was actually first patented to clean pipes of metals. So it's a metals chelator. So, one of the things, as I'm going to move back now to food and nutrition, is the lack of micronutrients. So, when you are being exposed to these things that chelate metals, one of the very important things that we've sort of missed out of our nutrition is micronutrients, minerals like, I'm going to say like magnesium, is very important to, you know, muscle performance and how your muscles work in your body. Zinc, copper. What's interesting is they've shown in Parkinson's that there's a buildup of iron in the brain, but these chemical processes in the body, there's a very important balance between iron and copper. And so if you don't get any copper, you have this imbalance in the iron and copper, or if the copper is being chelated by exposure to some of these chemicals that don't chelate iron, you can have that imbalance. So, you know, one of the things that we did start to focus on was the nutrition quality of our food, but also actually taking some supplements, mineral supplements, and focusing on our water supply also. So if people ask me, like, if I could do one thing, I'm like, cook, well, I can't tell you one, but cook healthy food at home and filter your water. Make sure that you're not drinking tap water, because another area of exposure where we're getting these chemicals is our public water supply is not required to test for or remove pharmaceutical pollution from the water. So all the drugs that your neighbors and things go into the wastewater, and that gets recycled. Of course, in Colorado, we're actually luckier than a lot of places because, you know, quite a bit of our water is first use water. But even that water is now getting exposed because, as you know, water is a cycle of evaporation and recycling. So we continue to get that. But, you know, John takes a multivitamin, he takes mineral supplements. He also takes additional vitamin D. You know, there are connections to a number of neurological diseases with vitamin D, and even with the current viral outbreak, some of the researchers are saying that vitamin A, D, C, and zinc can help your immune system. And I think, you know, what's interesting about those is those are all nutrients that are often, if you have a test to see what your vitamin D level is, if you have Parkinson's, you'll find that it's very low. So John takes that. There's a retired MD, PhD with Parkinson's out in California who helps me with a lot of research. And he sent me quite a bit of research about alpha lipoic acid. There's been a tremendous amount of research in that in cancer, but he has also sent some information on that in Parkinson's. And that's something you may look at. Another area that we just got some data in our microbiome samples related to glutathione. If you've heard of this, glutathione is an antioxidant. In our large set of data we have in my company, we did a comparison of men and women. So it was everybody, not just people with Parkinson's, but we have a lot more Parkinson's men than we have other men with other conditions in our sample set. And we found that there was a significant difference in glutathione production in the gut. And so looking at glutathione, there's a researcher out in California who started making supplements for children with autism. There's actually a lot of commonality in the gut, what's going on in the gut with children with autism and Parkinson's. And there were two different things that he was working on with these kids. One was glutathione and the other was butyrate. And what's interesting about that is there's a clinical trial with Kurt Fried here at CU using sodium phenylbutyrate. And Al Zapp, who is the founder of this company, actually one of his products is called probutyrate, and it's a more bioavailable level of butyrate. And what butyrate is a short chain fatty acid that can help protect the lining of your gut. And when the lining of your gut is more protected, it is more capable of absorbing nutrients. It's also more capable of keeping pathogenic bacteria from crossing that barrier. One of the things in this new research of the gut-brain axis in both Parkinson's and Alzheimer's is that alpha-synuclein, which is the protein involved with Parkinson's, and beta amyloid, the protein involved with Alzheimer's, both of those are also can be characterized as something called an antimicrobial peptide, where it's capturing a pathogen and trying to get rid of it. And what may be happening is there's, just too much activity for it to keep up with. So then back to the gut for a moment. One of the things we see in Parkinson's also is a loss of diversity in the gut and a shift of the balance to organisms that are either having to break down chemicals or are more pathogenic and resistant to antibiotics. And John and I went to Portland in 2016 to the World Parkinson's Congress, and there was a group of researchers there from Israel who were showing, they had done research in mice that showed that the sugar alcohol mannitol could stop the aggregation of the proteins, and at higher doses could actually pull the aggregates out of the brain of the mouse. And I thought, well, that was really interesting. And I came back and got a book on mannitol chemistry and started studying it. And in that book, learned that actually mannitol can be made by bacteria, lactic acid bacteria, which is, they are probiotic. And there are just a handful of strains of bacteria that make mannitol. Mannitol is also highly present in plants. And in algae and seaweed. And, if you go to like the health state of people in Japan who eat a lot of seaweed, they're also getting a lot more mannitol. And so we looked at it and said, gosh, okay, if you take mannitol by itself, you get GI distress and stuff, but could we make a probiotic that actually puts back the ability of your gut to make mannitol, because the bacteria actually make the mannitol from glucose and fructose, which we have too much of in our diet. And so back in 2016, around Thanksgiving, we made a small batch and gave it to John, and we're measuring his gut bacteria over time while he was taking it. And we could see that his gut bacteria were moving back closer to what a healthy person's look like. And he was actually starting to walk better and do better. Back in 2016, he was walking with a cane and was not able to navigate through a crowd and having a number of issues. And so after that, then we started having some other people try it, and not just people with Parkinson's, but just anybody try it. And what one of the more common feedback that we got was that it was really helping people with their chronic constipation. And constipation is a symptom, a typical 10 to 15 years prior to a Parkinson's diagnosis. People can look back and see that they had chronic constipation over, that 10 to 15 year period. And what happens is these bacteria in the waste sits in your body, and the bacteria produce toxins, and your body's having to deal with those toxins. And so, the feedback was that the product that we had made was actually helping people get back on a more regular schedule and not be constipated. So in 2018, we actually brought the product to market and started selling it. It's what we have, it's called Sugar Buster Biotica, but we're in the process of changing the name and doing some additional work on it. It has 8 strains of bacteria. 2 of those make the mannitol, but there's also 2 months ago, a group from Scotland published the research. I don't know if any of you guys saw it, about a single strain of bacteria that could stop the aggregation of the proteins. That strain of bacteria was called Bacillus Subtilis, and that is actually in our formula. So I have that paper I can share with Meredith as well, which was very exciting to us because there was some additional academic research showing the mechanism for how it might work. And for anybody who wants to try it, I have a Parkinson's discount. I can share that with Meredith as well. But I also want to talk about a couple of other things. Here's a book that was recommended to me by a doctor researcher from CU and National Jewish that we're working with, Eat to Beat Disease. Covers a lot of spectrum, but it does have Parkinson's and other neurological things in here to give you a nice overview of things to think about, nutrients, foods that can support those nutrients. The one thing I'll say that he doesn't talk about in here that I was disappointed in is, and so many of these people who talk about diets, it's like keto diet, this diet, whatever, but they don't talk about the quality of the food. So you can go on a keto diet or a vegetarian diet or, whatever, but if you aren't focused on the quality of the food that you're getting and whether or not it has those herbicide and pesticide exposures, can be problematic. You may be familiar, some people have talked about the ketogenic diet and the importance of fats to the brain. There are a number of different resources you can look on that. This is actually a cookbook called The Dopamine Diet, and it is basically focused on dopamine producing foods and low carb, because I'm going to return to the sugars again. Carbohydrates are simple sugars in processed foods. So you want to eat complex carbohydrates that have a different profile in your gut, a different mechanism of breakdown. These simple sugars and highly processed foods, fast pasta, breads and things like that. They're not going to be your friend when it comes to your Parkinson's. And this is actually she I would say is pretty close to a ketogenic. She's a lot more vegetarian focused. This protocol was developed by Dr. Walls, who is a physician from Minnesota who was diagnosed with MS and told that she probably wouldn't be alive in a few years. She was in a wheelchair, couldn't move, and developed the Walls protocol for basically paleo eating and highly focused on getting nutrient-dense foods, and reversed her MS. And she travels the world speaking about this. John and I eat a lot of the smoothies and things that are in this recipe book, which when you first look at them, you go, oh, that doesn't sound that good, but they're amazingly tasty. So I think that's something worth taking a look at. Another area that's starting to emerge is, and I find this is a little tougher for John because he's always hungry, is fasting, intermittent fasting, where you're only eating within a narrow window of time during the day that allows your gut to rest. Instead of constantly feeding the bugs in your gut, you're actually giving your body time to digest what's there and rest. If we eat from, the moment we wake up till the moment we go to bed, our body never really has the time to rest. With that, I'll open it up to some more questions because I've been talking a lot.
Yeah, I think what I came for was, can you hear me?
Yes.
I came for a little bit of a background in what to eat, what not to eat, what to avoid. I've done a lot of my own, investigated my stuff. What supplements do you use? How can we gain access to supplements? I really need some tangible, I need some names. I need some recipes. I need some direction. Because I'm a biologist. I've done a lot of my own research. I read a lot. I just want to cut to the chase.
I can follow up with Meredith with some an actual list of the cookbooks.
That'd be very helpful.
And I can give you a list of the supplements that John takes. I will say every person is a little bit different, and supplements can get to be quite expensive. So ideally, if you can get as much nutrient dense nutrition from your food,
right,
you're better off. But it's not always easy to do that when you have a compromised system. So I can follow up with some suggestions around that, and the brands and the different supplements that we've looked at, because not all supplements are the same.
Yeah, that would be really helpful, because I do not tolerate other medications well at all, like any of the antidepressants, any of all that stuff. Just doesn't work for me. So I'm very much oriented. I've been a vegetarian type person since I was 19, and I'm 69 now. So I don't mind changing my diet. I just need some direction, and I need some factual efficacy, and that's what I need.
I think the number one tip that I'm hearing from Martha, because people are very different, but the first place to start with your food is the quality of your food. Is that right, Martha? So looking at
definitely the quality of your food, and is the number one thing I would say is, as much as possible, try to know the source of the food and
yes,
the quality with which it's been grown.
Well, right now, we have to kind of take what we get with this COVID thing, that's happening right now. But for the most part, I was a gardener and grew a lot of my own stuff. So I'm not now, because I can't physically tolerate this, the extra-additional stress of gardening. Right. But I do make every effort to do that.
Martha brought up some good points, though, that there may be some hidden sources of toxins or places we need to be cautious. I would never think Cheerios.
Well, I've cut way back on anything and everything dairy, and it's made a considerable difference.
And so buying organic and reading labels, looking for maybe the specifics, non-GMO related, as well as some of the other things that she mentioned earlier.
Yeah, grains and dairy, and if, if you're not a vegetarian, ensuring that your meat source is pasture raised. Pasture raised meats will have a higher level of CLA. I can't remember what it stands for, but in the meat, which is important for your brain.
Yeah, and then there are a couple key things you recommended looking at like vitamin D, vitamin C, to guide people in starting supplements. Maybe they want to have their doctor do a blood draw or something regarding.
Yeah. Oh, that's one thing I forgot to mention is vitamin B, the B vitamins and B12 in particular. And in fact, that was actually B12 was a recommendation of Dr. Seeberger for John. There's quite a bit of evidence about the B.
Yes, that's become much more talked about than it was.
Martha, do you have thoughts on, I've been taking a product called Dopa Boost, and it has, I'm probably not going to say this right, Murkinia?
Mercunopurines. So that's actually, is that from Tesseract? Yeah, Tesseract. So that's the same gentleman who makes the probutyrate. And he is actually also coming out with a Parkinson's medical food sometime in the next 6 months. And
how can you locate this stuff?
I can send Meredith the website. You can purchase it online, but it's I think the website is TessMed, TESSMD, but I'm not positive. The company name is Tesseract Medical. And if you search for that, or even if you put probutyrate or Dopa Boost in your search engine, you'll get that.
One other question. Apple cider vinegar, is that helpful?
So, you know, one of the things that's interesting about the probiotic that we make has some impact on pH. Apple cider vinegar, I would say the importance of taking that would be to take it when you're eating, because it will make your stomach more acidic when you're eating, and it's important for you to have stomach acid to properly digest your food. Okay. But it's also interesting, you don't want too acidic of a pH in your body all the time, because acidic pH actually causes increased aggregation of proteins by bacteria. John does take a homemade supplement that we make called Firewater, that actually is in large part apple cider vinegar and then a bunch of roots and herbs that are fermented together. I can send that recipe.
And my last question is selenium. Is that helpful?
I'm not an expert on that, but I will follow up with Dr. McGowan, the physician out in California, because I want to say he sent me something about selenium. But if you just go back to my early conversation about trace minerals, selenium is a trace mineral. Right. But it is also important when you're looking at these trace minerals, you know, supplement places will sell you like single minerals, and you can overdose on minerals. So like something like copper, you can get copper poisoning. So you don't want, I mean, a lot of this is all about balance, and sorry, my lawyer's calling me again. You know, ensuring that you have the proper balance. And I think if you do look at that Sally Fallon Nourishing Nutritionist Cookbook, it talks a lot about nutrition in these traditional foods and how we were able to get a more balanced diet.
Yeah, on that note, I just want to, Martha kind of said this, but I just want to like recap it. Everybody is different. It is about balance, and certain things like vitamin D or certain trace minerals we can take too much of. So don't assume that you necessarily need more of something. I would start with comprehensive blood work with your PCP or your neurologist to find out what your current levels are. Treat them like medications, because they are medications. They're just over-the-counter medications. Right? And so a baseline of where you are with all of these different vitamins or trace minerals in your blood system right now, and then talk with your doctor and let them know, hey, I would like to start these supplements to bring up my level of vitamin D or B12 or selenium or whatever it is, and work with your doctor, at least give them the heads up, because there can also be medication interactions too, depending on what other medications you might be taking at the same time for maybe other health conditions. So just make sure that you are giving your doctor information about this. You start by finding out where you are now, and that'll also save you money. So that you're not investing in a supplement that might be expensive, but maybe you don't need it, because it can start to add up over time as well. So I would start with some blood work and a conversation with your doctor, as well as looking into some of the resources and books and websites that I will be happy to pass along from Martha to everyone who joined today's call, so that you have that background info as well. Do you guys have other questions? We're getting to just about 11 o'clock, but we do have a few more minutes. Go ahead, Ann.
Do you have any idea about the use of senna tea tablets or capsules for
Can you
gut?
say that again? I didn't understand what you said.
Do you know anything about senna, S-E-N-N-A, for gut motility?
I think I know it as another name, but there are a number of Ayurvedic herbs also that help with gut motility. There's a 3 combination herb mixture called Triphala that's used a lot in Ayurvedic medicine, which is traditional Indian medicine focused on the gut. And there's also a book called The Prime, Prime, by an Ayurvedic doctor who's a neurologist. And she talks about a number of those things in there. The title of the book, I think they were trying to sell more books by calling it a weight loss book. It's not really a weight loss book. Most of what she talks about in there relates to neurology.
Thank you.
Well, I know you've mentioned, this is Carol, actually, it says Steve. And we had some trouble with our video this morning. Sorry about that. I know you've mentioned blood work and all of that, to kind of see where you're at. And when I've talked to doctors about that, it's like it's hard to actually get that kind of blood work done. Generally, under my understanding, it's not necessarily something paid for through insurance sometimes. And they also don't seem to necessarily know how to interpret some of that. And then you've also talked about like the fecal samples and things, and there's a lot that can be learned from that route. So do you have a guideline or a thought or a suggestion on how do you go about finding somebody that can actually help you with all this? Because I take a lot of supplements and I'm just like going, oh my gosh, just another supplement. And I don't know that that's necessarily what I need to be doing.
Right.
And so how do you really find that out? Who can help with that?
I will say most traditional medical schools do not teach. They only get about 3 hours of nutrition
Right.
in their entire training.
Right.
And most physicians I've talked to know very little about nutrition.
Right.
So I would say 2 different potential avenues are finding a nutritionist, although even a lot of nutritionists, the training has been on, it's starting to change, but for decades, the training was only on macronutrients, not on the importance of these micronutrients. So looking for a good nutritionist who might also be affiliated with, you know, a group. I don't know if you are working with a nutritionist. Maybe Meredith may have someone.
Well, I've been to one, and maybe I don't ask the right questions. He kind of basically talked to me about what it is I eat. And for the most part, he said, you're basically, for the most part, eating a Mediterranean style diet. And, you know, he seemed pleased with that. But he didn't feel like, you know, I needed to like follow up or any of those kind of things.
I'll try to see if I can't talk to some of the contacts I have and see if Meredith, we could find somebody who has a better understanding of Parkinson's specifically. Because the other thing is protein. When you're eating protein, the time that you eat protein can interfere with the absorption of your medicine, can also have an impact on supplements. The other thing I would say, it's expensive to see a naturopath, but a good naturopath or an osteopath will have a much broader systems view of the body. And most naturopaths are the ones who do a lot more of the nutritional testing through, there's a company called Doctors Data, and the other one is called Genova Diagnostics. And there are a number of really good and FDA approved tests from these companies that test for, you know, nutritional absorption, for vitamin levels in the body, for, and we have done that from time to time, but it, you know, it's not cheap because your insurance company won't pay for it.
Right. And I do have a naturopathic doctor. It's kind of, I don't know how good she is. She's very nice and kind. But she's tried to guide me, you know, some and help me with some things that might be good supplements for Parkinson's. And, you know, I'm just kind of getting into some of that. She's like, you know, available on my insurance. So that's kind of strange. It's just the way they code things at the doctor's office. So I don't know how, you know, beneficial this is. I've also heard about functional medical doctors, and I know that they tend to do the fecal samples and give you a lot of information about what's going on in that area also. I don't know if you have any suggestions on that, and I know that's probably not always covered through insurance also.
Well, there's, you know, there are MDs who are functional doctors, and there are it's a so the naturopath that John and I see from time to time is a gentleman by the name of Mark Carney, and he is also a functional medicine doctor. There's an MD in Boulder, but it takes you like 6 months to a year to get an appointment with her. Dr. Jill Carnahan is, you know, I would say one of the most world-renowned functional medicine doctors who had some of her own health issues, and that's how she got interested in functional medicine. She's in not quite to Boulder, but off of 36, about 2/3 of the way to Boulder. Mm-hmm. You know, you have to like really dig into and ask some questions about, you know, how familiar they are with Parkinson's. Lori Mishley, who I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's in Washington State. She's a naturopath and functional medicine doctor who's a world-renowned Parkinson's expert. And I noticed even the Michael J. Fox Foundation had her on one of their talks recently. Yes, and she's somebody that, you know, I think could maybe, she might do remote appointments. I'm not sure how that works, or if not, she could probably point you to somebody that she feels is you know, close to a deep understanding that she has.
That's a lot of information for me to just jot down real quickly, and I'm very slow at that and not very
yeah. So Carol, I think what we'll do is, I've been taking some notes, but also I know Martha's going to send me some things. Okay. So we'll post or send out an email. I've kind of captured everybody who's in the call here. We'll send out an email with some of the things that were discussed and the resources. And it looks like there's, we need to do another session that answers maybe some of the practical questions that have been brought up as well. Like, what is the difference between a naturopath and a functional medicine doctor and my doctor? How do I get blood work? Some of these other things as well. So we'll send out an email with what we have so far, and try to do some follow-up sessions that continue this conversation, because there's definitely more here to dig into. We've talked about a lot, so.
Thank you. That would be excellent.
One thing that people could follow up on, Martha, your TED Talk is, I think, outstanding. And for the rest of us Parkinsonian people, you just have to dive in and get involved in this. It's your body, it's your Parkinson's. It's not like going to a doctor and just sit there and take some pills and you'll mask this or mask that. I think we want to get better. I don't want to just take drugs to be masked. My one question, Martha, on the intermittent fasting, how long a period does that need to be? 10 hours, 12 hours, 14 hours?
I mean, I think like what I've told people is, a lot of the books and things will tell you to also try to gradually work your window tighter. I know a number of people who only eat within a 6-hour window. That's a pretty tight window. What John and I have tried, and this shutdown has kind of gotten in the way of that because we're around food all the time, but is, to start out just giving yourself a 12-hour rest, and then you can cut it back to, then you have a 14-hour rest and you're eating in a 10-hour window, and then you have an 8-hour window you're eating, and you have a 16-hour rest. So you can, try to do it that. It is, tough if you, are somebody who eats a later meal in the day. You eat your evening meal later, then, you're going to have to push back when you have that first meal. And then like the book I showed you, I don't know if this is the best one. It goes into a lot of stories of different people and what they've tried. So a lot of people like to follow stories. But they also kind of talk to you about, having like a whole day fast. And I'm not sure if that would be a great idea for somebody with Parkinson's. So I think it's also important to listen to what your body is saying to you. But I think it's an interesting area to explore, because what the fasting does is it creates ketosis. And if you, go back to the ketogenic diet, you're attempting to create ketosis.
Yeah. Thanks for all your information.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
I was going to say we're about at the end of our time, but feel free to email me if you have more questions. I've got everybody's email address except for Dennis. So Dennis, if you can hear me, I did send you a little chat on the side. If you can chat me your email address, that would be really helpful. So I'll send you this info. And we'll do some more follow-ups. We have nutrition every month, but we will definitely make sure that we can maybe target some of the questions that came up today too, and share resources. So Martha, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. You gave us a lot to think about and some really great resources. So we'll definitely connect and get that out to everybody. And thank you guys for joining us.